Thomas lived on a small farm. It was a charming place nestled in the countryside where the air was always fresh and the skies were a brilliant blue. It had fields that stretched as far as the eye could see, a barn that stood tall and proud, and a big red tractor that chugged along the dirt paths, making the farm come alive with its hum. Thomas loved the farm, but most of all he loved his goat, Cricket. They were inseparable, always finding new adventures together. Cricket was small and brown with white spots like freckles, making her look unique and adorable. She had long floppy ears that bounced when she walked and a waggly tail that never seemed to stop. Every morning, Thomas would sneak Cricket extra pieces of sweet hay, knowing it was her favourite treat. Cricket would wriggle her nose in delight and gobble them up quickly, savouring every bite. Then she'd nudge Thomas with her head, asking for a scratch behind the ears, which he always happily gave. Thomas and Cricket were the best of friends, sharing countless moments of joy and laughter. One sunny morning, Thomas decided to take Cricket exploring, eager to discover new places on the farm. They wandered through the tall grass, the sun warm on their backs, feeling the gentle breeze. Cricket skipped ahead, her bell jingling merrily, creating a cheerful melody. Thomas giggled, chasing after her, his laughter echoing through the fields. "Slow down, Cricket!" he called, but Cricket was already disappearing into the tall cornfield, her tail wagging excitedly. Thomas knew another adventure was just beginning. The cornfield was like a maze, an endless sea of green and gold, the tall stalks towering over Thomas, making him feel small and lost. Cricket was nowhere to be seen, her usual playful bleats absent. "Cricket!" Thomas called out, his voice small in the quiet field, echoing slightly. He pushed aside the leaves and peered down each row, his eyes scanning for any sign of movement, but there was no sign of his mischievous goat. His worry grew with each passing second. Suddenly Thomas heard a rustling sound breaking the eerie silence. He turned quickly, his heart pounding. Was it a fox? Or maybe a badger? His imagination ran wild. He held his breath, listening intently, every muscle in his body tense. To his relief, it was just Cricket. She emerged slowly, as if nothing had happened. She poked her head out from behind a stalk, munching on a juicy-looking ear of corn, completely oblivious to Thomas's worry. "Cricket!" Thomas exclaimed, relieved and exasperated all at once. "You naughty goat! How could you scare me like that? You gave me such a fright!" he added, his voice trembling slightly from the adrenaline. Cricket just blinked at him with her big, innocent eyes and let out a happy bleat, as if to say, "What's the big deal?" Thomas couldn't stay mad at her for long. Her innocent charm always won him over. He burst into laughter, shaking his head at his silly goat, grateful that the adventure had a happy ending. Later that afternoon, Thomas and Cricket found themselves by the babbling creek that ran through their farm. The sun glinted off the water, and the air was filled with the chirping of crickets and the sweet scent of wildflowers. Thomas unpacked their picnic basket. He had made cheese and pickle sandwiches, which were Cricket's favourite, and secretly his favourite too. Cricket munched happily on her sandwich, while Thomas sipped on his apple juice. As they ate, Thomas pointed out the shapes he saw in the clouds. A fluffy white bunny hopping across the sky, a giant grinning cat with a long wispy tail. Cricket tilted her head, listening to Thomas's stories, her big brown eyes full of wonder. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The day was coming to an end, and the world seemed to be wrapped in a warm, glowing blanket of twilight. "Come on, Cricket," Thomas yawned. "Time to go home." He felt the day's adventures catching up to him, and all he wanted was the comfort of his bed. He packed up their picnic and headed back towards the farm. Cricket trotting along beside him. The path was familiar, and they had walked it many times before. They were halfway home when Thomas realized something was wrong. The usual landmarks seemed to have vanished in the dimming light. He stopped and looked around. The trees and bushes cast long shadows, making everything look different and unfamiliar. Everything looked different in the fading light. They were lost. Thomas's heart sank. The realization hit him hard, and a wave of panic started to rise. He didn't want to be stuck out here all night. The thought of spending the night in the dark, unfamiliar woods was terrifying. Cricket seemed to sense his fear. Her usually playful demeanor changed, and she became more alert. She nuzzled his arm with her head and let out a soft bleat, as if to say, "Don't worry, I'm here." Her gentle gesture brought a small measure of comfort to Thomas. Thomas wrapped his arms around Cricket's neck and hugged her tight. In that moment he felt a little less alone. He may be lost, but at least he had his best friend with him. Together they would find their way back home, no matter how long it took. Suddenly Thomas heard a familiar sound. Woof! Woof! It was Buster, the farm dog. He was barking excitedly from the edge of the cornfield. Thomas had never been so happy to see a wagging tail and a wet nose. Buster led them out of the field and back to the farm. Thomas's parents were so relieved to see him, and Cricket got extra pats and hugs for being such a brave goat. That night, snuggled up in bed, Thomas thought about his adventure with Cricket. He had been scared when they were lost, but Cricket had stayed by his side. She was more than just his pet, she was his best friend. And Thomas knew that no matter what adventures they had, their friendship would always lead them back to each other.